I never imagined that a single family dinner could change my entire perspective on trust, respect, and love. My name is Lucy, and for most of my life, I believed my family cared for me. My parents, my sister, they were my world. But one evening, everything I thought I knew about them came crashing down in the cruelest way possible. It started with laughter. My parents laughed, not in joy, but in mockery. My sister, whom I had always trusted, leaned back and called me a failure, her words sharp and calculated. I froze. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the shadows where their judgment could not reach me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a joke, a moment of playful teasing. But the intensity in their eyes, the smirk on my sister's face, told me this was deliberate. I felt the weight of humiliation pressing down, a suffocating cloud that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't even respond. My mouth was dry, my thoughts scrambled. Every insult echoed in my head, repeating like a cruel soundtrack. I was desperate to defend myself, but I didn't know how. I had never been confronted like this before. This wasn't sibling teasing. This was a calculated exposure of all my perceived weaknesses, meant to hurt me deeply and make me feel small. And then he entered the room, her husband. I had seen him many times before, always composed, confident, and generous with words. But that night, he became something more. The moment he spoke, the room shifted. His voice was calm but firm, carrying authority that demanded attention. He didn't yell. He didn't call out my parents or my sister aggressively. He simply spoke the truth. He defended me. He reminded everyone of the accomplishments, struggles, and heart I had poured into my own life. And as he did, I felt a warmth spread through me, a relief I hadn't expected. He didn't just defend me. He exposed the hypocrisy of their mockery, the unfairness of their judgment. My parents' laughter faltered, replaced by silence. My sister's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned expression. I had never felt so validated in my entire life. Suddenly, the power dynamics had shifted. For the first time in years, I realized that ridicule could be countered not with anger, but with truth, clarity, and someone willing to stand up for what was right. I could feel my chest expand with the courage I hadn't realized I possessed. That evening, I reflected on every insult, every sneer, every whispered word of doubt I had endured from my family. I thought about the countless times I had tried to prove myself, only to be dismissed or overlooked. I realized that the sting wasn't in their words alone, but in the expectation that I should accept them without question. That expectation, that unspoken rule, had been broken. And for the first time, I saw that I had allies, people who valued fairness, truth, and justice more than appearances. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between disbelief, relief, and lingering hurt. It was difficult to process the idea that my family had treated me this way for so long, and yet I felt an unprecedented sense of empowerment. I began to analyze the moments leading up to the dinner, noticing patterns of favoritism and subtle manipulation I had ignored. My sister had always been competitive, yes, but this was deliberate cruelty, orchestrated precision. My parents' laughter wasn't harmless. It was enabling her to assert dominance over me. Recognizing this gave me clarity, but it also ignited a determination within me. I realized that my reaction would define the rest of my story. I could either retreat into silence, allowing their judgment to shape my self-worth, or I could rise, assert my voice, and reclaim the dignity that had been undermined. I chose the latter. I began observing, documenting, and reflecting. Each interaction, each comment, each subtle glance became data I could use to understand the dynamics of my family. Awareness, I discovered, is a powerful tool. It allows you to navigate betrayal without being consumed by it. As the days passed, I noticed subtle changes in my family's behavior. My sister avoided eye contact, perhaps realizing that her power over me was not absolute. My parents, too, seemed slightly uncomfortable, though they tried to mask it with casual conversation. The world I had once seen as stable, predictable, and nurturing now felt fragile, full of hidden currents I had never fully understood. And yet, this fragility offered an opportunity, a chance to reclaim my place, not by seeking revenge, but by demonstrating integrity, self-respect, and unshakable confidence. One afternoon, I sat alone, reflecting on the role her husband had played that evening. His intervention had not only shifted the room, but had given me a model for how to navigate cruelty and judgment. He hadn't retaliated with anger. He had addressed the truth with calm authority. That approach resonated deeply with me. I began to adopt a similar mindset, observing first, responding with clarity second, and always maintaining composure. I realized that strength is not loud or aggressive. It is deliberate, steady, and rooted in truth. Over the next few weeks, I focused on personal growth. I reconnected with hobbies and passions I had neglected, investing in skills and experiences that reinforced my self-esteem. I spent time with friends who offered genuine support, and I cultivated a sense of independence I had never fully appreciated. Each small accomplishment became a step away from the shadows of judgment and ridicule, a reminder that my value was not determined by their mockery, but by my own actions, choices, and perseverance. I also found myself observing my sister more critically. Her confidence, once intimidating, now seemed fragile when stripped of the facade of superiority. I realized that cruelty often masks insecurity. By remaining composed and grounded, I could navigate interactions without allowing her behavior to destabilize me. I didn't seek confrontation. I sought understanding, awareness, and preparation. Knowledge, I realized, was more empowering than any argument could be. In quiet moments, I reflected on my parents' role. Their laughter, their favoritism, their complicity in her cruelty. It was a revelation. I understood that their actions were not entirely malicious, but rooted in bias, blind spots, and societal expectations. Recognizing this didn't absolve them, but it allowed me to release some of the personal anger that had threatened to consume me. I learned that understanding motivations, even flawed ones, can transform resentment into clarity. As I grew stronger, I began considering how to address future interactions. I didn't want to be passive, allowing mockery to continue. I also didn't want to be aggressive, allowing emotion to dictate my response. Instead, I planned deliberate conversations, carefully choosing moments when clarity, composure, and truth could have the greatest impact. My goal was not to humiliate or shame, but to assert boundaries, convey my worth, and demand respect in a way that was undeniable. I also realized the importance of documenting my journey. Writing became a tool of reflection, insight, and strategy. I recorded interactions, analyzed patterns, and articulated my feelings with precision. This exercise not only provided emotional clarity, but also strengthened my resolve. Each entry was a step toward reclaiming my narrative, a way to ensure that my story would not be misrepresented, ignored, or dismissed. Throughout this process, I noticed subtle shifts in my emotional state. The initial shock and humiliation gave way to a steady confidence. I felt empowered by awareness, reinforced by preparation, and inspired by the example her husband had set. Calm, deliberate action had transformed what could have been a moment of lasting trauma into a catalyst for growth, self-respect, and personal strength. One evening, I reflected on the concept of fairness and justice. Life had shown me that cruelty could exist even within those we trust most. But I also realized that my response defines my character more than their actions define my worth. By choosing integrity, composure, and truth, I could reclaim power without stooping to retaliation. This perspective became a guiding principle in every interaction, shaping how I navigated both family and social dynamics. At work, among friends, and in social gatherings, I began to notice a subtle difference. My confidence radiated. People responded to me differently, not out of fear, but respect. I understood that dignity, clarity, and emotional control carry an influence that mockery and cruelty cannot overcome. I was no longer the passive target of judgment. I was a participant in my own narrative, shaping perception through calm, deliberate action. I also began to explore forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. Holding on to anger and resentment only extended my suffering. By releasing these emotions, I created space for personal growth, self-awareness, and emotional resilience. Forgiveness didn't excuse their behavior. It allowed me to reclaim my life, unburdened by lingering negativity. I could engage with my family on my terms, not theirs, and maintain control over my emotional state. As weeks turned into months, I noticed a broader pattern emerging. The laughter that had once dominated family gatherings no longer carried the same power. My sister's attempts at ridicule became less frequent, less sharp. My parents seemed to recognize, even if subtly, that I had shifted. This observation reinforced the lesson that strength isn't always aggressive or loud. It can be quiet, composed, and deliberate. Consistency in confidence and clarity changes perception more than a single outburst ever could. During this period, I also focused on building meaningful connections outside of family. Friends who valued honesty, trust, and respect became pillars of support. I invested in relationships that nurtured growth rather than stifled it. I realized that betrayal teaches an invaluable lesson. The family you are born into may not always offer the love or respect you deserve, but chosen family, built on trust and mutual support, can become a source of strength, stability, and empowerment. As I continued to navigate life after that fateful evening, I noticed something remarkable. The more I focused on myself, the less power my family had over me. The laughter, the judgment, the sneers, they still existed, but they no longer defined my emotional state. I had discovered something profound. When you center your own growth, clarity, and integrity, the attempts of others to belittle you lose their grip. It was as though a veil had lifted. I could finally see my family as they truly were, not just as my parents and sister, but as individuals with flaws, biases, and insecurities that shaped their behavior. I spent hours reflecting on the events of that evening. I thought about my sister's confidence, my parents' complacency, and the calm, authoritative way her husband had intervened. I realized that true strength doesn't demand attention, it commands it. It doesn't shout, it resonates. He had shown me that confrontation doesn't always require anger or retaliation. It requires truth, composure, and courage. That lesson became my guiding principle in every interaction that followed. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in family dynamics. My sister's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a wary glance whenever she tried to assert superiority. My parents seemed less confident in their mockery, perhaps sensing that their words no longer had the desired effect. I observed these changes quietly, nodding them without comment. I didn't gloat. I did confront. I simply maintained my composure, reinforcing through action that I was no longer a passive target. I also began to think strategically about how to approach future interactions. I wanted to ensure that no one could undermine my confidence again, but I also didn't want to create unnecessary conflict. I realized that clarity and preparation were essential. I would choose my words deliberately, set boundaries clearly, and assert my value without aggression. The goal was not revenge in the conventional sense. It was reclamation, reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my rightful place in any space I occupied. As I reflected, I also began documenting my thoughts and experiences. Writing became a tool for emotional processing, for strategic planning, and for self-reflection. Every interaction, every comment, every subtle glance was recorded and analyzed. This practice allowed me to observe patterns I had previously ignored. I saw favoritism, subtle manipulation, and unspoken hierarchies that had governed our family dynamics for years. Recognizing these patterns didn't make me bitter, it made me aware. Awareness, I realized, was empowerment. I also invested in personal growth outside of family dynamics. I revisited hobbies and skills I had neglected: painting, writing, public speaking. Each small achievement reinforced my self-esteem and reminded me that my worth was not defined by my family's judgment. I spent more time with friends who offered authentic support, valuing honesty over appearances. Slowly, I rebuilt a sense of identity that was independent of my family's opinions, grounded in my own actions and values. One afternoon, I sat alone in my room, reflecting on the concept of fairness. Life had demonstrated that cruelty can come from those we trust most. But I also realized that my response to such cruelty defines my character more than their actions ever could. By maintaining integrity, composure, and clarity, I could assert my worth without resorting to retaliation or anger. This insight became a cornerstone of my personal philosophy. As I applied this mindset, I began noticing how subtle power dynamics shifted in everyday interactions. At work, colleagues who had once dismissed me now sought my opinion and guidance. Friends who had underestimated my resilience began to notice my strength. Even in social settings, I could sense a change in how I was perceived. Confidence, composure, and authenticity have a resonance that mockery cannot match. I was no longer the person they tried to diminish. I was a force defined by my own terms. Despite these victories, I remained reflective. I didn't want to lose sight of the emotional lessons embedded in my experiences. Betrayal, ridicule, and mockery had been painful, yes, but they had also catalyzed growth, awareness, and resilience. I realized that each insult, each sneer, had been a lesson disguised as cruelty. By facing it consciously and deliberately, I had transformed it into empowerment rather than allowing it to foster bitterness. Over time, I observed my sister more carefully. Her confidence, once intimidating, now seemed performative when stripped of her facade. I realized that cruelty often masks insecurity. This insight allowed me to interact with her without fear or resentment. I did not seek to humiliate her, but I no longer allowed her attempts at dominance to unsettle me. Calm, grounded observation became my tool for navigating family dynamics. My parents, too, became subjects of careful observation. Their laughter, once sharp and demeaning, now lacked the same impact. I noticed their attempts to maintain authority were often inconsistent, sometimes undermined by subtle self-doubt. Recognizing these vulnerabilities didn't make me arrogant, it made me deliberate. I began to plan interactions in ways that allowed me to assert boundaries and demonstrate my worth without engaging in destructive confrontation. I also focused on the emotional aspect of my recovery. The shock, hurt, and humiliation I had felt initially could have lingered indefinitely, but I chose a different path. I processed my emotions intentionally, using reflection, journaling, and conversations with trusted friends to navigate the pain. By doing so, I freed myself from lingering resentment, replacing it with clarity, composure, and confidence. Emotional mastery, I discovered, is one of the most powerful forms of revenge. The ability to live fully, unshaken by others' cruelty. In this period, I also began understanding the subtle lessons of empathy and perspective. My family's actions were not entirely malicious. They were often informed by bias, insecurity, and societal expectations. Understanding this did not excuse their behavior, but it allowed me to release some of the personal anger that could have consumed me. I learned that clarity and perspective transform bitterness into understanding without compromising one's boundaries or self-respect. As my confidence grew, I became more deliberate in choosing battles. I no longer reacted to every slight or insult. Instead, I focused on moments where clarity, composure, and truth could have maximum impact. I realized that restraint is not weakness, it is strategy. By selecting how and when to assert myself, I could maintain dignity while communicating strength. This approach reshaped my interactions across family, work, and social contexts. I also found myself exploring forgiveness in a new light. Forgiveness was not about excusing cruelty. It was about liberating myself from the weight of resentment. By releasing anger and bitterness, I could engage with life more fully, cultivating relationships and opportunities that aligned with my values. Forgiveness became a tool of empowerment, allowing me to move forward without being anchored to past betrayals. Throughout this period, I documented every insight, observation, and emotional shift. Writing allowed me to analyze patterns, refine strategies, and deepen self-awareness. Each entry reinforced the realization that strength is not always loud or aggressive. It is deliberate, composed, and rooted in truth. By observing without judgment and acting with intention, I was transforming every experience of betrayal into a lesson in resilience and empowerment. As months passed, the impact of her husband's intervention continued to resonate. His calm authority had set an example, demonstrating that confrontation need not be destructive. By standing for truth and fairness, he had shifted the dynamics of that family gathering. Observing his approach repeatedly reminded me that integrity and composure carry a weight that mockery and cruelty cannot match. I began integrating these principles into every aspect of my life, from personal relationships to professional interactions. I also began noticing the subtle ways my sister attempted to regain dominance. Small comments, veiled criticisms, and comparisons were meant to unsettle me, but I remained composed, using observation rather than reaction as my response. This strategy reinforced my independence and self-assurance. I realized that when others attempt to undermine you, the most powerful response is calm awareness combined with deliberate action. During this time, I strengthened my friendships with those who valued authenticity and support. These relationships became a refuge from the emotional turbulence of family dynamics. I discovered that chosen family, built on trust and mutual respect, can offer stability and empowerment that sometimes surpasses biological family. This realization reshaped how I allocated my emotional energy, ensuring that support, respect, and understanding were reciprocated. One day, I reflected deeply on the concept of justice. True justice, I realized, is not always about retribution. It is about reclaiming control over your life, asserting your dignity, and exposing truth when necessary. By embodying these principles, I could neutralize the impact of betrayal without stooping to the level of those who sought to diminish me. Empowerment, I discovered, comes from composure, clarity, and unwavering self-respect. I also explored my own reactions to the humiliation I had endured. Initial anger and shock were natural, but prolonged resentment would only have hindered my growth. I learned to observe my emotional responses, understand their source, and choose intentional actions rather than reactive ones. This self-mastery became a source of power, allowing me to navigate interactions with both family and society with confidence, dignity, and purpose. Through this reflection, I discovered that personal growth often emerges from adversity. Betrayal, ridicule, and exclusion can catalyze profound transformation if approached consciously. By embracing clarity, composure, and self-awareness, I was turning experiences of pain into lessons of resilience. Every insult, every sneer, every attempt to undermine me became an opportunity to refine strategy, strengthen resolve, and cultivate inner strength. As time went on, I noticed a shift not only in my family, but within myself. The humiliation I had felt initially began to feel distant, like a shadow that no longer held power over me. The laughter, the ridicule, the judgment, all of it remained a memory, a reminder of a past I had survived and grown from. I realized that true empowerment doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from reclaiming your own narrative, defining your worth, and living in alignment with your values. My sister, once so confident in her superiority, began to falter. I noticed subtle hesitation in her words, moments where she seemed unsure. It wasn't vengeance on my part that caused this. It was the quiet authority of my presence, the fact that I had stopped letting her mockery define my self-image. My parents, too, seemed to recognize, even if unconsciously, that their attempts to belittle me no longer held influence. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, but it was profound. Respect, I realized, could not be demanded through fear. It had to be earned, and it could not be taken from someone who chose to stand in their own truth. I also continued to reflect on the lesson her husband had taught me that night. Calm, measured, and full of integrity, he had reminded me that standing up for someone is not about aggression, it's about truth. That moment had not only changed the dynamics in the room, but it ignited a spark inside me. I began to understand the importance of using influence responsibly, defending others, and asserting truth with grace. That evening became a turning point, a foundational experience that would guide how I handled conflict and challenge for years to come. With this newfound perspective, I began to rebuild relationships with my family on my own terms. I did not seek approval or validation. Instead, I interacted with awareness, setting clear boundaries and maintaining composure even in moments that might have previously triggered anger or sadness. I realized that emotional control is one of the most powerful forms of influence. By managing my own responses, I could navigate complex family dynamics without being derailed by past betrayals. At the same time, I invested deeply in personal and professional growth. I returned to hobbies, pursued new opportunities, and cultivated skills I had long neglected. Each step reinforced my confidence, reminding me that my value was determined not by my family's perception, but by my own actions, dedication, and integrity. Friends and colleagues noticed a shift in me. They recognized not arrogance, but poise, clarity, and quiet strength. And in that recognition, I found not just validation, but motivation to continue refining who I wanted to be. I also spent time helping others navigate betrayal and judgment in their own lives. Through conversations, advice, and shared experiences, I realized that many people face subtle cruelty and exclusion from those they trust most. By sharing my story, I could provide insight, encouragement, and a model for resilience. Each interaction reinforced the principle that empowerment is not just personal, it can ripple outward, influencing and inspiring those around you. In reflecting on my journey, I recognized the complex mix of emotions I had experienced: hurt, humiliation, relief, gratitude, and empowerment. Each emotion had served a purpose, teaching me to observe, analyze, and respond with intention. I realized that life is rarely simple or fair, but that doesn't mean we cannot find balance, strength, and clarity. By processing each experience consciously, I transformed adversity into a roadmap for personal growth. There were moments of quiet satisfaction as well, not in gloating or revenge, but in knowing that I had reclaimed my narrative. I had stood in the face of mockery and betrayal without compromising my values. I had allowed truth, composure, and integrity to guide my actions. That inner strength became a beacon, not only for myself, but for others who might face similar challenges. Witnessing the subtle shifts in my family's behavior reinforced the power of steadfastness, calm, and self-respect. Over time, I came to understand that forgiveness, perspective, and self-awareness are intertwined. Forgiveness was not about excusing their actions. It was about freeing myself from lingering resentment. Perspective allowed me to understand motivations without condoning harm. Self-awareness provided the clarity to navigate interactions without being consumed by emotion. Together, these principles became a toolkit for life, enabling me to maintain control, dignity, and emotional equilibrium, even in the face of betrayal. I also reflected on the importance of allies, those who intervene with integrity when others falter. Her husband had not only defended me, he had modeled a way of responding to cruelty that was deliberate, effective, and ethical. Observing his actions reminded me that support often comes from those who act with calm confidence, not aggression. It reinforced the lesson that intervention grounded in truth is infinitely more powerful than retaliation fueled by anger. As the years progressed, I noticed a lasting change in the family dynamic. My sister's attempts to assert dominance became less frequent, her words less biting. My parents' subtle favoritism and laughter lost their edge, not because I sought to punish them, but because I had shifted my own position. By maintaining composure, asserting boundaries, and demonstrating unwavering self-respect, I had transformed the environment without engaging in destructive confrontation. This realization was liberating. I understood that the power to navigate betrayal lies primarily within oneself. External validation is fleeting, and attempts to control others' perception are often futile. True empowerment is cultivating an internal sense of worth, clarity, and dignity that is unshakable. Once I grasped this, I felt a freedom I had never known before. I also began to examine the lessons beyond family interactions. Life is filled with moments where others may underestimate, mock, or betray us. I realized that each of these moments provides an opportunity to cultivate awareness, emotional intelligence, and resilience. By approaching adversity strategically, observing patterns, and responding with clarity, we can reclaim control without compromising integrity. This perspective became a guiding principle in every area of my life. I remember one evening, reflecting on the contrast between humiliation and empowerment. The laughter that once caused tears and self-doubt now seemed almost absurd in memory. I realized that I had grown in ways I could not have predicted. The very experiences that once threatened to define me had become the foundation of my strength, resilience, and confidence. Life had transformed a painful memory into a source of power. Throughout this journey, I also learned to appreciate the nuances of empathy and understanding. Recognizing the insecurities and biases that shaped my family's behavior allowed me to approach interactions with calm awareness rather than reactive emotion. This did not excuse their actions, but it prevented me from being consumed by anger. Emotional clarity, I discovered, is a form of mastery that strengthens character and guides meaningful decisions. By the time I truly internalized these lessons, I had created a life that reflected my values, independence, and resilience. I no longer measured my worth by family approval or external judgment. I surrounded myself with relationships rooted in trust, support, and shared respect. I pursued goals aligned with my passions and strengths. Each step reinforced the understanding that empowerment is self-defined and cultivated, not granted by others. Looking back, I realized that the turning point had not been my parents' laughter or my sister's ridicule. It had been the intervention of someone who stood firmly for truth and integrity. That moment demonstrated the profound impact of deliberate, calm advocacy in the face of cruelty. It taught me that courage is not always loud. It is precise, thoughtful, and guided by principle. And it reminded me that one moment of intervention can change the trajectory of a life. Finally, I reflect on the person I have become. I am no longer the timid, self-doubting girl who once sat in that office, overwhelmed by humiliation. I am a woman who has faced betrayal, processed it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. I understand the importance of boundaries, the value of composure, and the power of observing before reacting. And most importantly, I understand that my worth is inherent. It does not depend on anyone else's approval. To anyone watching this story, I want you to know that betrayal, mockery, and judgment do not define you. Your response does. By standing in truth, cultivating composure, and reclaiming your narrative, you can transform even the most painful experiences into lessons of empowerment. Life may not always be fair, but the way you navigate injustice and cruelty will shape your strength, resilience, and self-respect for years to come. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to Mortal Revenge for more dramatic, emotional stories of betrayal, resilience, and empowerment. And I want to ask you, have you ever faced a moment where someone unexpectedly defended you and changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes these stories connect us in ways we never imagined.